They said Victorian virtue gleamed like polished brass, but beneath that shine hid a machine built for desire and discipline. Behind parlor doors where ladies poured tea and gentlemen recited scripture, refinement was a mask for hunger. In these rooms, pleasure was engineered with screws, pedals, and silk. Pain wore perfume and lace. What history called progress was often invention turned inward upon flesh, reputation, and obedience. Tonight, we open the ledgers they left behind to read what can no longer be spoken aloud, the story of how elegance learned to hurt. Beautifully. London, 1823. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, turning dust into gold, as if even the air wished to appear respectable. In these drawing rooms of the West End, civility was a stage play, every smile rehearsed, every silence meaningful. To the uninvited eye, nothing stirred beyond teacups and polite laughter. Yet beneath the chandeliers lay the faint scent of oil, brass, and something warmer, anticipation. The age called itself enlightened. Its gentlemen quoted philosophy and collected curiosities. But their truest fascination was anatomy disguised as art. A handful of them met in private parlors, where conversation moved delicately, from metaphysics to the management of wives. There, amid damask drapery, the Regency Bloom was born, a contrivance of brass petals that opened at the turn of a hidden key. To the eye, it resembled a mechanical flower. To the flesh, it revealed another purpose entirely. Its maker, a Savile Row metalworker, had once fashioned clasps for royal jewelry. When a patron whispered of a commission requiring precision of restraint, he delivered elegance that could wound. The Bloom's polished edges caught candlelight like a chalice. It looked harmless, almost devotional. The first to use it reportedly did so as an experiment in correction, a lesson for a young woman who had laughed too freely at dinner. What began as discipline became theater. Each turn of the screw transformed reproach into ritual, the drawing room into a chapel of control. The language surrounding it softened the cruelty, reform, refinement, restoration. Victims were told the Bloom encouraged virtue through endurance. That pain, when ornamented, purified. Servants carried away muffled cries as if they were chamber music. Even the neighbors, hearing nothing amiss, assumed decorum reigned. London society applauded itself for maintaining order, unaware that its elegance was balanced upon suffering. Rumor of the Bloom spread through whispered catalogues. Those discreet pamphlets slipped between medical treatises and spiritual guides. One entry read, "A regulator for wayward affection, foldable and discreet." Another promised it could restore harmony within the household. Each sale added a moral alibi to mechanical vice. The narrator of these findings, a collector of scandalous instruments, traced invoices and letters. Names appeared in coded lists: magistrates, bishops, widowers. The devices traveled from Mayfair mansions to poorer lodging houses where imitation blooms, crudely made, enforced silence more than virtue. What had begun as aristocratic amusement trickled downward, proof that shame could be democratized. When the collector finally obtained one authentic specimen, its beauty unsettled him. Brass still gleamed, though time had dulled the gears. Inside, a faint scent of rose oil lingered, the perfume used to mask friction. Holding it, he realized the true horror was not its capacity to harm, but its civility. This object had been admired, even loved, for the grace with which it concealed brutality. That evening, he recorded a single line in his ledger: "Refinement is the lie that taught us how to hurt politely." Outside, London's bells marked the hour for dinner parties and prayers. Inside the parlor, silence returned, heavy, perfumed, and absolute, as if the city itself preferred not to know what its own gentility had cost. In the mid-Victorian years, England's conscience turned into architecture: stone churches, high windows, iron gates. Morality was everywhere, printed on pamphlets, preached from pulpits, sewn into charity banners. Yet behind those walls of devotion, sin was not erased. It was managed. The rhetoric of purity found its truest expression not in mercy, but in correction. And where sermons ended, instruments began. Among the many homes for fallen women that dotted the outskirts of London, one in particular, St. Brigid's Refuge, hid a secret beneath its linen closets. Its matron, a woman of unyielding faith, kept an object she called the nun's tightening. The name itself was a paradox, spiritual yet mechanical. It consisted of leather and brass, its purpose explained in sanctimonious language as penitent regulation. Each notch on its screw was said to bring the soul closer to virtue, though the body trembled under its authority. Clergy and benefactors believed the device worked miracles. Reports spoke of former courtesans who emerged reclaimed, their speech subdued, their gazes lowered. But letters found decades later told a darker truth. One sister wrote, "We are told this is therapy, yet each turn feels like confession taken through iron." Another, hidden in the margins of a prayer book, confessed that she prayed not for forgiveness, but for breath. The power of the tightening lay not only in its physical use, but in its theology. Those who administered it claimed divine sanction, that discipline of the flesh could cleanse the spirit. In that logic, suffering became a sacrament. The matron herself, interviewed late in life, said she believed she was teaching women to close the door between temptation and grace. She spoke of the faint click of the device as if it were an amen. The narrator of this account traced invoices from ecclesiastical suppliers. Each bore cryptic entries: therapeutic strap assembly, reformative adjuster, approved for convental use. The church's language had disguised its machinery. To the eyes of a visiting priest, these instruments were symbols of order. To those within their reach, they were sermons made metal. At St. Brigid's, each act of treatment was recorded in a small blue ledger. The handwriting was careful, almost tender. Sister Martha, 10 minutes of restraint, visible calmness after release, and repentance achieved through guided endurance. The phrasing turned agony into virtue, silence into progress. The system worked precisely because it believed itself moral. Outside the refuge, London streets hummed with hymns and commerce. Sunday bells rang over factories where soot stained every promise of purity. Men who funded the refuge sat in pews beside their wives, proud of their charity, unaware, or pretending not to know, that redemption had been mechanized. The very tools that stitched together corsets and clocks were now shaping women's repentance. One evening, the narrator visited the crumbling remains of St. Brigid's. Only the foundations remained. The chapel roof had collapsed decades before. In the rubble, he found fragments of brass fittings, rusted, yet unmistakably deliberate in design. He described them as fragments of faith made tangible. To him, they embodied the Victorian paradox that the same society which condemned desire also built devices to study, restrain, and secretly indulge it. As dusk settled over the ruins, the bells of a nearby parish began to toll. The narrator imagined their echo through the halls where the tightening once turned, each ring a reminder of prayers twisted into obedience. He closed his notebook on a final observation. When sanctity requires suffering, salvation becomes indistinguishable from control. In the heart of London's Mayfair, where gaslight shimmered like liquid gold across damp cobblestones, there existed an unspoken world between refinement and ruin. Behind the facades of respectability, those red brick houses with white trimmed windows gathered the city's most curious minds and restless bodies. Artists, widows, politicians, and heirs convened beneath painted ceilings to explore what the daylight forbade. They called them salons, but what unfolded within was closer to confession than conversation. At the center of these private evenings stood a device known as the velvet vice. It was introduced as a medical curiosity, a contraption of padded clamps and polished brass, disguised under the vocabulary of therapeutic experiment. Its mechanism was simple yet insidious. a concealed ratchet that allowed pressure to be increased with delicate precision. To the uninitiated, it was a marvel of engineering. To those who knew its purpose, it was the perfect union of restraint and revelation. Accounts from these soirees survive only in fragments, coded diaries, half-burned invitations, and the confessions of servants who dared to speak decades later. One such witness, a footman named Barrett, recalled the evenings as theaters of morality turned inside out. Guests arrived masked, greeted not by names but by titles of vice: the philosopher, the widow, the cardinal, the rose. Every gesture was rehearsed civility. Every movement hid anticipation. The velvet vice was not a spectacle for cruelty alone. Its power lay in its ambiguity. Was it punishment or pleasure disguised as penance? Each adjustment of its ratchet created a tension both physical and psychological, a slow revelation of what lay beneath decorum. The device taught those present what the pulpit and parliament refused to, that repression breeds its own rituals. Beneath the hum of conversation, beneath laughter too carefully timed, the faint metallic clicks of the vice became a rhythm, the pulse of a society that pretended to master desire even as it worshipped its machinery. When the evening's music swelled, those sounds were absorbed, made indistinguishable from the waltz. But they lingered. Every guest, it was said, carried the echo home with them. The narrator followed the trail of the vice's maker, a clocksmith named Ellery, once employed by a firm that produced surgical restraints. His design was both elegant and cruel: brass, velvet, and the mechanical subtlety of a timepiece. The same city that engineered locomotives and telescopes had also engineered discretion for the human body. Ellery's signature, a small E engraved beneath the hinge, appeared years later in a police inventory after a raid on a disreputable club near Holborn. The officer's notes described one mechanical restraint, purpose undetermined. They could not see what society itself had made invisible. The salons eventually dissolved under scandal. Newspapers hinted at foreign immorality, preferring to blame the continent rather than confront their own. Yet the devices survived, boxed, repurposed, renamed. A few entered private medical collections, stripped of their context but not their meaning. In one such display, the curator's label read simply, "Instrument for Therapeutic Posture Correction, 1847. The narrator ended his account with an image that lingered long after the last flame of gaslight had died: a masked woman adjusting her gloves, her reflection trembling in a mirror clouded by steam. Somewhere behind her, the vice released its final click. In that sound was all Victorian London, a civilization both fascinated and terrified by its own hunger, forever seeking to hide its confessions behind the comfort of velvet. In the drawing rooms and servant quarters of Victorian London, appearances were carefully curated. Curtains blocked the sun but not the scrutiny. Chandeliers reflected not only light, but the ever-present tension between submission and authority. In households advertised as pinnacles of domestic virtue, decorum masked a rigid hierarchy, and behind that hierarchy, instruments ensured obedience. Among the most notorious of these was the collar of obedience, an articulated neck device wrought from iron, its interior padded for comfort or endurance. Catalogs described it innocuously, a restraint for disturbed patients, yet ledger entries revealed a different clientele. Gentlemen of wealth and influence ordered it not for mental correction, but to mark possession. Wives, concubines, and servants suspected of overstepping social bounds found themselves measured not only by etiquette, but by cold metal resting against the skin. The collar's weight and permanence transformed the body into a statement, a silent emblem of transgression made visible. The device was subtle in its cruelty. Alone, it could cause unease, a constant reminder of surveillance and control. In conjunction with expectation, posture, and whispered reprimands, it became a ritual, a lesson in limits, both social and corporeal. Gentle pressure suggested compliance. The slightest shift reminded its wearer of ownership. To the outsider, it was a fashion accessory or medical novelty. To the subject, it was a private theater of discipline, where every movement, every glance was calculated for observation. Invoices traced the collar's journey from London workshops to stately homes across the countryside. Artisans recorded not only dimensions, but the preferred finishes: polished brass for the drawing room, iron for servant quarters. Correspondence between patrons and makers hinted at refinement, ensured discretion and comfort. The lady must not suspect indignity, only learn decorum. The language disguised intent, converting power into propriety, control into civility. Letters found decades later described the psychological weight of the collar. A maid wrote of the heaviness at the nape as an unspoken law, of how it shaped her carriage, her breath. A wife's journal recounted the subtle pressure as a reminder that her body, her choices, were no longer wholly hers. In these quiet confessions, the collar became more than iron. It was an architect of behavior, a sculptor of obedience. The narrator followed these traces into forgotten boarding houses, noting how collars were rarely used in isolation. They accompanied strict schedules, ritualized exercises, and social isolation. Their presence settled anxieties for the upper classes. Transgression could be disciplined visibly, without scandal. Clothing concealed metal, furniture framed compliance, and etiquette ensured that neither witness nor victim fully acknowledged the performance. As dusk fell over London, the narrator imagined a slow knock at a servant's door. Inside, a life measured by obedience awaited the sound. A pause, a breath, the gentle shifting of iron against skin, the quiet calculation of propriety. Outside, lamps flickered on the foggy streets, offering light to those who might glance but never enter. Within, the collar remained, silent yet insistent, a symbol that power could be exercised invisibly, and that refinement was often only the shadow cast by control. In the end, the device's legacy was not in injury, but in submission, a mechanical echo of societal expectation, a weight both physical and moral, reminding all who wore it that obedience was always observed, always measured, and never optional. The age of invention brought steam engines, telegraphs, and a curious appetite for the mechanical regulation of the body. Among these creations, the patent throne stood out, a contraption that married engineering pride with moralizing cruelty. Marketed as a therapeutic device for hysteria or delicate constitution, it was an upholstered chair, deceptively ordinary, concealing a network of gears, warming plates, and subtle mechanisms designed to administer pressure and warmth to the pelvis. To Victorian eyes, it promised relief. In practice, it could correct behavior while cloaked in propriety. Doctors and inventors collaborated in pamphlets and letters to frame the throne's function as medical necessity. A coroner's marginalia noted its intended use: to restore vigor and relieve melancholy. Discreetly and scientifically, shop catalogs described it with gleaming adjectives: restorative, discreet, comfortable, modern. Yet hidden behind this veneer were countless testimonies, fragments of diaries, and procurement notes revealing a darker truth. Socially privileged patrons often employed the throne to assert dominance, to regulate conduct, or to remind a woman of the boundaries imposed upon her. The device's design reflected both ingenuity and subtle coercion. A system of gears allowed gentle but insistent pressure. Warming plates could adjust the sitter's comfort, sometimes imperceptibly. For the casual observer, it was an armchair. For the unwary, it was a tutor in restraint. Victorian society, obsessed with decorum, permitted the throne because its cruelty was hidden behind cushions and engineering elegance. The mechanism itself became a lesson in control, teaching patience, endurance, and submission without scandal or outward injury. The narrator traced correspondence between doctors and families who purchased the throne. One letter, annotated in careful script, suggested a young woman be seated, until propriety is firmly impressed. An improvement observed. Midwives recorded the throne's use in diaries, a combination of encouragement and discomfort. Framed as medical guidance, yet leaving an unmistakable mark on the sitter's comportment. Women caught between social expectation and medical authority often endured its pressures in silence, their acquiescence rewarded with approval, or at least the appearance of it. The throne's advertisements capitalized on the interplay of secrecy and propriety. Shopkeepers wrote of discreet consultation for gentle correction and promised that the device could be transported without notice. Patrons were reminded that virtue, like machinery, required careful maintenance. Its presence in a household was both a statement of refinement and a tool of surveillance. A polished seat, empty yet charged with expectation. Despite its ostensibly medical purpose, the throne found its way into parlors, drawing rooms, and private studies, where conversation drifted from family welfare to the management of desire. The chair taught lessons in endurance, patience, and compliance, its mechanisms turning silently under the guise of care. The psychological imprint, the awareness that one was observed, measured, and guided, became as potent as the device itself. By the evening, the throne sat unoccupied, its cushions warm, its gears silent. The narrator recorded the lingering impression of a device designed to instruct without overt violence, to discipline without scandal, and to enforce social hierarchy under the guise of health. The patent throne exemplified a society that equated mechanical ingenuity with moral authority, where engineering became the arbiter of conduct and the body, quietly, was taught its place. In the narrow streets and sewing rooms of Pimlico, London's underclass wove the fabric of empire not only with thread, but with secrecy. Here, commerce and cruelty intersected. The city's elite sought discretion as much as propriety. And in this pursuit emerged the silk noose, a pliant loop of woven silk with hidden knotworks. Marketed to gentlemen as a device for discreet correction, it could restrain a hand and arm, or subtly the neck. Applied with practiced skill, it left no mark yet carried an unmistakable lesson in obedience. The silk noose was a paradox, elegant in its materials, clandestine in its application, intimate in its consequences. Its purpose was rarely merely punitive. Men used it to ensure secrecy, to humiliate without leaving evidence, to remind women that betrayal or missteps were never truly private. Letters traced by the narrator reveal that survivors of the noose's tightening often became mute witnesses, their voices swallowed by fear of accusation or reprisal. A single tug could communicate authority, possession, and expectation without raising suspicion. Pimlico's workshops supplied the noose as they did ribbons and lace. Artisans took pride in the invisibility of their craft, weaving strength into softness, cruelty into elegance. Trade routes carried the silk from distant ports to tailor shops, then to private rooms where gentlemen practiced the ritual of tightening, knot by knot. The process required care. An abrupt pull could betray the device's intention. A gentle hand taught compliance without overt resistance. The noose's subtlety became its cruelty. The narrator reconstructed accounts from surviving diaries and court depositions. One woman wrote of the sensation as a quiet persuasion, a pressure that made her aware of her own position in the household and society. Another described the knot's tightening as an invisible hand correcting me, reminding me what is permitted and what is not. In these fragments, the noose became both teacher and witness, shaping conduct through unseen authority. Socially, the silk noose was tolerated because it left no evidence, only memory. Its presence reinforced hierarchy. Those who possessed knowledge of the device could command, and those subjected to it could learn their place. It functioned as both tool and symbol, a private assertion of power, a warning to others. Where scandal threatened, it intervened silently, enforcing submission without public notice. Evening descended over Pimlico, lamplight glinting on damp cobblestones. In one unremarkable lodging house, A noose lay coiled atop a wooden chair. The threads glimmered faintly, a reminder that restraint could be delicate and yet absolute. Behind closed doors, a hand would reach for it, tighten it with precision, and release it with care, leaving the room unchanged to the casual observer, but forever altering the lives of those it touched. The chapter closed with a single sound, the soft, decisive tightening of the knot, taut against silk, against skin, against the unspoken rules of society. It was a lesson in silence, a lesson in discretion, a lesson in power made invisible. Pimlico's streets carried the echoes of obedience into the night, leaving victims tethered not only by silk, but by memory, fear, and the knowledge that their submission was never complete. The silk noose endured as both artifact and idea, an elegant instrument of private terror in a city that prized civility above all. Victorian London, obsessed with reflection and display, framed its citizens in mirrors both literal and metaphorical. Drawing rooms, salons, and theaters multiplied the self, offering endless surfaces for inspection. It was into this culture of scrutiny that the mirror box emerged, a narrow confinement lined with polished glass, designed to exploit vanity and enforce obedience. Victims were strapped into the box, subtly restrained by leather belts and pressure mechanisms, left to confront an infinite repetition of their own image. The device did not break the body. It fractured the mind, making every reflection a silent judgment. Initially used in curiosity shows and sideshows, the mirror box migrated into private chastisement chambers. Theater logs recorded its exhibitions, repentant thieves, errant servants, or actresses accused of impropriety were displayed before paying audiences. When transferred into private homes, the device's purpose shifted subtly but profoundly. Laughter, music, and conversation continued outside the box, yet within. The individual faced an endless gallery of self, each mirror multiplying humiliation. The body became material, the image a weapon, the mind a theater of public and private evaluation simultaneously. Inventors documented the mirror box's construction with precision. The angle of each pane, the placement of straps, and the tension of leather served psychological ends. Victims could stand, sit, or kneel. The device conformed to ensure maximum self-scrutiny while limiting escape. Diaries found in forgotten attics recorded the subtle effects, the slow realization that movement was constrained, that exposure was permanent, that one's own reflection could not be ignored. The device was a lesson in endurance, a tutor in shame, and a mirror in more than the literal sense. It reflected societal expectation and personal inadequacy with equal cruelty. One governess recounted, decades later, how the box taught her the weight of observation. "I could not look away," she wrote, "and yet I wished only to vanish." Her reflections were not merely of her physical form, but of imagined spectators, of moral codes made flesh, of invisible eyes judging gesture, posture, and expression. The mirror box, in this sense, operated as both surveillance and pedagogy, an apparatus in which the body was disciplined through perpetual self-inspection. Though confined and restrained, some victims reported the perversity of fascination. They were compelled to examine themselves, to internalize the gaze of others, to feel both violation and instruction in one inexorable experience. The mirror box imposed reflection, literally and figuratively, making humility, compliance, and shame inseparable. Its power lay in its quiet cruelty, in the knowledge that even in solitude, no one could escape their mirrored audience. Evening in London found the box empty in one attic, its mirrors glinting faintly in gaslight. The straps hung limp, the polished surfaces catching shadows, and yet the sense of surveillance lingered. It was a silent witness to obedience, a machine that transformed introspection into torment, a structure in which one's own reflection became the instrument of judgment. The chapter closed on a final mirrored visage, unfamiliar and unyielding, reminding all who encountered it that in Victorian society, humiliation could be engineered, prolonged, and made inseparable from the self. In Victorian London, bureaucracy extended its reach into bodies as well as ledgers. The clerk's scale was a device that transformed moral judgment into mechanical precision. Constructed as a table with concealed clamps, levers, and graduated measures, it enforced an arithmetic of behavior. A hand suspected of deceit might be weighed against the length of letters hidden in a desk. A servant's spine measured for gestures deemed improper. A governess's resistance calculated according to rules scrawled in ledger margins. Every motion, every breath, could be quantified and balanced against written evidence. The device was both apparatus and ritual. Victims were positioned according to strict protocol. Straps pressed, levers adjusted, weights applied. The physical sensation was one of precise discomfort, measured, deliberate, and inescapable. Each application corresponded to a documented transgression. Every turn of the scale, a translation of moral judgment into corporeal experience. Files reveal how the scale was used to codify guilt, to enforce settlements, to silence dispute. The calculation of punishment became an act of administration, sums, entries, and signatures replacing empathy, reflection, or compassion. A governess, accused of impropriety, was seated across from the device, her hands clamped in place while the length of letters in her desk determined the pressure applied to her wrists and shoulders. The sensation was both precise and overwhelming, the balance of the device converting abstract accusations into tangible, measured pain. Clerks and city officials documented every adjustment, ensuring consistency, fairness, and discretion. Though in practice, fairness was the cruelty itself. Pain was reduced to a fraction, guilt to a number, and submission to a mechanical formula. The scale's appearance was deceptively mundane: polished wood, brass fittings, and sliding weights that suggested measurement rather than coercion. Yet beneath the surface, it was an instrument of exacting authority. Those who encountered it learned rapidly that every misstep, every omission, had a consequence calculated in pressure, in time, in restraint. The device demanded attentiveness, shaping behavior through anticipation as much as through the discomfort of its clamps. Evenings in private offices carried the ritual forward. Clerks measured, adjusted, and documented while those under scrutiny endured the quiet precision of the scale. The rhythm of ledger and lever intertwined, each action reinforcing the other. What seemed like ordinary administration became the stage for controlled, relentless power, a system in which paper and flesh were intertwined, in which morality was enforced with mechanical rigor. After the scale was reset, the victim released, and the ledger updated, the room retained the echoes of calculation. The impression lingered long after the clamps were removed, the awareness that compliance, deception, or deviation had been observed, measured, and judged. The clerk's scale transformed the abstract into the bodily, making the human form an instrument through which the machinery of authority operated. The precision of its cruelty was inescapable, a weight of measurement that left an invisible mark, demonstrating that in Victorian England, even bureaucracy could be weaponized to shape behavior and assert dominance. Victorian surgeons commanded prestige, their hands skilled in repair and restoration. Yet behind closed doors, some instruments of healing were turned toward control. The locking speculum, appearing as a routine gynecological device, concealed mechanisms that could secure indefinitely, applying pressure in a manner both precise and humiliating. Its interior surfaces, textured and contoured, ensured discomfort without visible injury, leaving the sitter exposed, constrained, and intimately observed. These devices, ordered through medical suppliers and recorded in procurement logs, were often justified as therapeutic. A patient complaining of faintness or nervous distress could be seated and restrained under the guise of examination. The mechanical elements allowed incremental tightening, the sensation deliberate, calculated, and unrelenting. Subtle pins and levers held the instrument firmly in place, while assistants were trained to monitor both bodily response and demeanor. The balance between correction and injury maintained with unnerving exactitude. Testimonies preserved in diaries and rare depositions recount the psychological impact. Women describe the sensation as a blend of instruction and violation, each moment a negotiation between enforced stillness and internal resistance. The device imposed awareness, shaping posture, expression, and compliance. Resistance was met not with overt force, but with extension of the mechanism's hold, a reminder that submission, even under clinical guise, was non-negotiable. The surgeon's role straddled dualities: healer and enforcer, observer and manipulator. While patients were ostensibly treated for hysteria, nervous disorders, or reproductive complaints, the mechanical specificity of the locking speculum ensured that correction could be exacted without scandal. Medical logs recorded procedures with antiseptic detachment, yet the human experience behind these entries was stark, intimate, and profoundly invasive. Each engagement reinforced hierarchy, demonstrating the authority of science, the mastery of the male practitioner, and the subordination of the patient. Even when instruments were removed, their influence lingered. Victims carried the memory of restraint, the imprint of pressure, and the acute awareness of exposure. The locking speculum taught endurance and quiet acquiescence, and its use was carefully calibrated to avoid lasting injury while instilling a precise lesson in submission. Manuals and letters reveal the device's intended audience: women of fragile social position, whose compliance was desired, whose discretion was essential, and whose visibility was carefully controlled. The clinical environment amplified the psychological effect. Whitewashed walls, polished trays, and the rhythmic clink of instruments underscored the contrast between healing and coercion. Observation became surveillance, inspection became correction, and the line between medicine and domination blurred. Victims understood that the device's authority derived not only from metal and mechanism, but from the prestige and perceived knowledge of the practitioner. At the conclusion of each session, instruments were cleaned, trays organized, and records annotated. The room reverted to quiet order, leaving behind the invisible mark of the device. The locking speculum exemplified a society in which science and propriety masked coercion, where the veneer of legitimacy allowed intimate control to be exercised with mechanical precision. The terror lay not in overt brutality, but in the orchestrated, clinical, and unavoidable awareness that one's body could be constrained, measured, and observed under the guise of care, leaving an indelible psychological imprint. The Industrial Revolution brought not only smoke and steel, but a new appetite for spectacle. Beneath London's fairs and private exhibitions, demonstrations of technology often hid more intimate curiosities. Among these innovations was the London wheel, a device designed to alternate discomfort and stimulation across the body. An iron ring, its interior lined with soft padding and serrated plates on opposing surfaces, could be rotated to press, prod, and manipulate the thighs and torso. Its engineering was precise, ensuring gradual, deliberate contact that blended pain and sensation in ways both controlled and unpredictable. The wheel was rarely displayed openly. Its true function was reserved for closed auctions and private salons, where specimens were offered to patrons as both curiosities and instruments of moral correction. Men of parliament, inventors, artists, and wealthy industrialists sought these exhibitions, where the wheel served simultaneously as amusement and covert punishment. Women, often chosen for their perceived indiscretions, were secured within the ring, restrained by hidden clasps that allowed no escape while maintaining an appearance of propriety. Each rotation enforced endurance, conditioning the body to submission while reinforcing the hierarchy of power. Letters and auction records reveal meticulous arrangements, the duration of rotation, pressure applied, and even the timing of pauses were calculated to maximize the blend of physical strain and psychological tension. Victims were aware of being observed, yet powerless to evade scrutiny. The sensation was subtle and cumulative, soft padding juxtaposed with serrated edges, pressure alternating across intimate zones. The device's cruelty lay in the modulation, enough to provoke awareness and discomfort, not so much as to leave a visible mark. The wheel's victims often emerged marked more by memory than by injury. Diaries recount trembling hands, flushed skin, and the lingering heat of restrained exposure. Yet beyond physical sensation, the experience imposed obedience and compliance, transforming the body into a site of mechanical pedagogy. Observers understood the interplay of technology, restraint, and social expectation. Engineering was not neutral. It could shape conduct, enforce hierarchy, and manipulate pleasure and pain in equal measure. Behind closed doors, the wheel became an emblem of industrialized cruelty. Civic pride and innovation masked its true function, converting ingenuity into a mechanism for controlling flesh. The contrast between public fascination with machinery and private application of sensation was stark. The same hands that designed locomotives or steam engines now controlled the rotation of a ring that pressed against a body, asserting ownership and authority in ways that were intimate, deliberate, and unspoken. As the wheel turned slowly in a dimly lit chamber, the victim's awareness of each shift, soft then sharp, gentle then firm, created a rhythm of anticipation and resignation. Time became measured in rotations, endurance in the quiet acceptance of alternation, and dignity in the ability to survive observation without outcry. The device, polished and precise, remained a silent teacher, converting industrial might into a lesson in endurance and compliance. The chapter closes with the image of the wheel still, its padded and serrated surfaces empty, yet imbued with the traces of its previous occupant. In its silence, the emblem of progress lies in stark contrast to the human cost of curiosity. A reminder that industry, invention, and order could be repurposed to exact control over the body, blending technology with private cruelty in ways that were both ingenious and morally devastating. In an era of revolution and reform, anxieties about class, morality, and propriety permeated the private chambers of the English elite. When public law appeared insufficient, some turned to clandestine measures to enforce discipline. The velvet guillotine emerged as a device designed to combine ritual, correction, and spectacle. Draped in dark textile, its weighted blade appeared ceremonial, almost benign. Yet it possessed the capacity to sever not heads but hair, clothing, and in select cases, inflict shallow, humiliating cuts that preserved the veneer of gentility. The device was deployed in secret purifications and private tribunals, where penitent individuals, servants, companions, or those accused of moral or social transgressions were trimmed of their perceived corruption. The ritual was precise. Participants were positioned under the guillotine's frame, hands restrained, clothing arranged, and hair exposed. As the thin blade descended, it met the intended target with measured weight, leaving behind symbolic evidence of correction rather than overt injury. The theatricality of the velvet guillotine allowed punishment to be enacted without scandal, maintaining appearances while producing profound psychological impact. Records from clandestine settlements show its use in settling debts of honor, coercing silence, and enforcing loyalty. Victims were often unaware of the device's full effect until the moment of application. The light scrape of the blade across fabric or hair carried with it a potent symbolism, a reminder that every misstep, every whispered rumor, every perceived deviation from decorum could be met with intimate correction. The sensation, though not physically severe, was intensely personal. The brush of metal across the body became a lesson in submission and discretion. The velvet guillotine also served as a tool of social erasure. Those who were trimmed sometimes disappeared from public life, their reputations quietly dismantled as the blade left no lasting wound, but an unmistakable mark on memory. Its application communicated a hierarchy of power. The elite could shape bodies, behavior, and appearances without leaving traceable evidence. In households where discretion was paramount, the device allowed justice to be private, yet profoundly effective. Auction logs, private letters, and estate inventories reveal the care with which these devices were constructed and maintained. Polished wood, velvet coverings, and the precise counterweight of the blade ensured consistency and ceremonial elegance. The device demanded ritualized participation from both operator and subject. Compliance was measured, posture corrected, and attention maintained. The subtlety of its application magnified the psychological resonance. It was not the depth of injury, but the intimacy of control that ensured its lasting effect. As the velvet guillotine descended for the last time, hair or fabric severed with a soft, deliberate stroke, the chamber retained an almost sacred silence. Participants understood that correction had occurred without spectacle, that punishment could be exacted with civility, and that authority required no outward violence to assert dominance. The blade's trace lingered, marking not the flesh but the psyche, a tangible reminder of compliance and hierarchy. In its final stillness, the velvet guillotine remained both tool and emblem, a mechanical arbiter of morality, a silent enforcer of discretion, and a private instrument of intimate power. Its existence underscored the lengths to which those in authority would go to control behavior, maintain appearances, and enforce social order, blending ceremony, correction, and cruelty in ways that were quiet, deliberate, and enduring. Decades passed, parlors fell silent, and catalogs gathered dust. Yet the apparatuses that had enforced discipline and exposed desire endured, quietly preserving the intimate cruelty of an age. The final chapter traces these artifacts: the Regency Bloom, the velvet vice, the patent throne, the silk noose, and the London wheel, among others. Once tools of control, they now rested in attics, private collections, and museum archives, catalogued in antiseptic language as curiosities, medical oddities, or social artifacts. To the casual observer, they were inert, decorative, or merely historical. To those who remembered, or those who sought to reconstruct memory, they radiated an ethical charge that no catalog could obscure. Collectors, often scholars of the macabre or historians of social mores, preserved these devices behind glass. They were polished, labeled, and displayed as objects of curiosity, yet each retained the imprint of bodies, the echoes of restraint, the shadows of intimate compliance. Diaries, municipal records, and orphan journals offered glimpses into the lives of those who had been subjected to these instruments. Women and men subjected to mechanical instruction bore psychological scars invisible to the outside world, but recorded in trembling letters and whispered confessions. In these remnants, the mechanisms themselves became narrators, silent witnesses to endurance, coercion, and submission. Some artifacts, carefully catalogued, could be traced through auctions, private correspondence, and estate inventories, mapping the diffusion of cruelty across households, salons, and industrial halls. The Regency Bloom, with its hidden catch, spoke of subtle punishment disguised as propriety. The velvet vice, designed to restrain while inducing measured discomfort, recalled masked salons and whispered rituals. The patent throne, warmed and weighted, testified to medicalized domination. The silk noose, soft yet unyielding, tethered bodies and wills alike. And the London wheel, now still, remained an emblem of industrialized control, its rotations a memory of endurance and observation. To witness these artifacts today is to confront the human cost of civility, the intersection of social order, gender, and authority, and the lengths to which society once went to regulate desire and obedience. Their presence within glass cases, sterile and polished, cannot erase the experiences they produced, nor the social structures they reinforced. They are reminders that order, progress, and refinement can coexist with cruelty, that engineering and etiquette can conspire to constrain and instruct, and that history often disguises trauma beneath sophistication. The Museum of Forgotten Flesh exists not as a single edifice, but as an accumulation of memory and evidence, a moral archive cataloging the endurance, humiliation, and intimate coercion of countless individuals. Each object is a testament to how Victorian order mechanized shame, desire, and control, turning human bodies into instruments of pedagogy, punishment, and psychological instruction. In the end, the room of glass and shadow demands recognition. The instruments, once active, now silent, convey a final warning. Innovation and civility may conceal calculated cruelty, and remembrance is the only safeguard against repeating it. Within their polished surfaces lies a haunting reflection, one that compels acknowledgement of suffering, endurance, and the human cost embedded in the machinery of social control. These objects, beautiful, engineered, and concealed, are not merely relics, they are witnesses to history's quiet, intimate horrors.